5.5 years ago, I had preached my first sermon here as Foes Church. We kicked off, and this was my text. Luke chapter 10, verses 38 and 42. I'm sure you remember it, every detail, But my title of that sermon was One Life, Don't Waste It. And I was hoping that this text would orient us around our ministry and the goals that we were going to have. And then at the 5-year anniversary, it was like a week or two before, I preached the text once more. And so this is now my third time preaching this text on this pulpit. And they usually say fourth time's a charm. So it's still going to have its hiccups, but come back in 5 years, I'll probably preach it again, and that time it should be all right. But no, I'm excited to go into this text because for me, there was things in my preparation this week that I never saw before. And I've read the story lots of times. I've studied the passage, half a dozen times, preached it a few. But there's always things that God's doing and that He's working in us that as we approach the text, we're different. And the text is meeting us in different places. And there's different layers that are getting, pulling back and new things for us to see. And so that's my delight in being able to preach this text now for the third time. I have a question to start the sermon, though. I wonder if you have ever had an event that you were geeked about. You were like, I'm going to host this themed party. It's going to be at our house. These are the various things that we're going to do. And while the night unfolded, there was something for you that, though you were excited, that excitement eventually turned into bitterness. Just me? Right, where we're somewhere, and the bitterness didn't come because the company was terrible, or the spaghetti didn't come out right, or somewhere for you it was between the meal, the preparation, the cleanup, the table, the drinks. That bitterness creeped in, and you found yourself becoming a supporting character in your own home. Right, where everyone else is seemingly having a good time, there's tons of side conversations going around, but you felt like somehow I disappeared in my own home. Anybody? Right? And there's something about feeling like you disappeared in your own home. You're like, hey, this was my event. This was my show. How have I slipped through the cracks? And the missing ingredient in the spaghetti sauce seemed to be your bitterness that you were just humping more and more into, because you're just like, how could these people be having a great time and I am not having a good time? I think that's a common feeling for people when you have such high expectations of an event and the event doesn't go as planned. And this really is the tension within our text. You see, most of the times when you're studying a passage, one of the things you want to do is say, hey, is the text asking a question? Because if the text answers a question, if there's a problem within the text, there's an answer that Jesus affords. There's an answer that Jesus offers. And I think that the question of this text really is it possible to love Jesus, welcome Jesus, and serve Jesus, and still miss Jesus? Is there an ability to be doing something busy for God, doing something busy within ministry, and miss being in the presence of God Himself? You see, it was about 5 years ago now that I started attending a pastor's group. We call it Pastor Soul Care. It's a counselor in this area, Dr. Scott Engelman, prolific guy, and he really seeks to care for pastors' souls, because this can become a quickly unhealthy job if you're not careful and tending to your own soul. And I remember going there. I had a friend invite me. He was like, dude, you're drowning in your church revitalization. You should come to this. And so I came to it, and I just remember Scott asking me, what is the state of your soul? It's an interesting question. And it's one that many of us if we don't ever think about, we may not have a framework for. Here's the thing. I was already almost a year into doing a church revitalization effort. I'd been a pastor for, a year now, and I didn't know how to answer this question. Honestly, I was optimistic. Like, I was positive. I'm happy. I'm not angry. I'm just assuming that the state of my soul must be probably pretty good. I mean, I'm in my Bible at least once a week getting ready for a sermon. Right? I'm not completely malnourished. And through a series of questions, what Scott was able to pull out of my soul was that my soul was exhausted. Like, I was wanting to do something great for God. Like, I was thinking, it's going to be 3 months in, and we're going to have to knock this wall down because we're just going to have to make more room for more people. Like, I was just thinking, God is going to do something with great magnitude, and I was excited for it. And I was like, God, I'll work 80 hours if you need me to do it. I won't sleep. I will, whatever, God. I'll have my life wrung out for this work. That was my preparation. That was what my heart was. And I found myself actually exhausted. And through these series of questions, what began, the image that started growing in my mind, what I saw was me as a basketball player. And if you've ever seen me hoop, I'm like the white mamba. I can hoop. Ask Austin Hefner. He has learned the hard way. And the image I had was, here I am out on the basketball court, but I'm hobbling along. And I'm feeling tired, and I'm feeling broken, and I'm feeling like I'm looking at Jesus, who's the coach, and I'm like telling him, hey, I'm not doing well. And all I could see was Jesus say, keep going, keep pushing, push through it. And there was no sympathy or empathy and what I thought was Jesus cared about what I could do for him, but he didn't care about me. And that's a dangerous place to have your state of your soul be when you're leading a church. Because if you're thinking, okay, that all God cares about me is what I can do for him, well, then you will exhaust yourself, you will bury yourself in work to say, do you care about me now? Have I earned enough of your love? Have I done enough to be valued by you? And so I'd been so focused on wanting to do something for God that I was hardly spending any time with him. And I wonder for you, as you think about your own life, is that true of me? And so that's the tension in our text. And if we rush through this text, we will misread it. We will miss key details. Again, I've missed them. And so what this text isn't, this text is not anti-hospitality. This text is not anti-woman. This text is not anti-snacks. Lo and behold, Jesus winds up at another dinner party. Shocker in Luke, right? I mean, here he is, every other chapter somehow showing up in a meal at a table that's being prepared for him. What John's going to do is he is going to expose the tragedy of doing the right thing from the wrong place. That's possible. It's possible to be doing holy, good, righteous things and have a bitter soul all while doing it and feel justified in our doing. And so, too often I think this text has been treated to try to explain which sister's right and which sister's wrong. Should I be Mary or should I be Martha? Right? We try to discern, okay, who's the good one? Who's the one doing the right thing? But again, this comes from a misreading of Jesus' correction to Martha and missing his invitation to Martha. We have a modern allergy to correction. And so we don't want to be corrected, and because we think there's correction, then there must be, God's scolding, but that's not what Jesus is doing here. And so I think what Jesus will show throughout this text is that when service is severed from presence, the soul will deform. Like if we are not serving from a presence with Jesus, a being with Jesus, and we're just focusing on doing for Jesus, like, and you miss the being, there's an unhealthy thing that happens in the soul. And Jesus is going to show that. He's not going to say service is bad. But service apart from presence won't lead you to life. It'll kill you. We've all seen this. We have seen busybodies in the church that are running around trying to do things to fill some kind of void, fill some kind of gap. And if that's the case, if that's the case, you have an unhealthy soul. And I'm not saying that from a judgment place. I'm saying that from an experience place. Pastoring a church in the first year, I was trying to be busy doing things, trying to be busy meeting with people, trying to be busy starting ministries, busy trying to preach great sermons, busy trying to do great things, and all the while, I was doing it from the wrong place. And I wasn't doing it a place from presence, and therefore I had a really unhealthy soul. And so I'm not saying that as a judgment to you, but I'm saying, hey, as you assess your soul, ask yourself, am I serving out of an overflow from my presence with God? Otherwise, you will be fueling your service with a different grade of gasoline that does not power your soul. It's like your soul requires premium and you're putting basic into it. That's what that's like when you're doing it apart from presence and being with Jesus. And so let's look at the text here with me. We're going to look at the very first verse of our text, verse 38. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to the village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And so if you're joining us for the first time, for the first 5 months of our series, going through Luke, we called it the Upside Down Kingdom. We were showing things about how Jesus was doing things very contrary to the culture. He was saving all of the wrong people, and the world seemed topsy-turvy in Jesus' kingdom. But what we were showing was Jesus was actually going right side up. But then there was a key delineation within the story that comes in Luke chapter 9, where in verse 51, it says that Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem. Prior to that, Jesus is spending almost all of his time in Capernaum. He's going into all these villages around this really small place, but all the buzz, people are going crazy over this guy, Jesus. They don't want him to leave, you can imagine. But now he's leaving Capernaum, and he is setting his face towards Jerusalem. And so from chapter 9 to chapter 24, Luke is giving us this long journey to Jerusalem. And you know how this text started? As Jesus and his disciples were on their way to where? Jerusalem, yeah. He is still fixated. He still has his destination. He still has the mission and the journey that he's on. And so here he is on his way to Jerusalem, and he gets welcomed. And again, where I told you, I've missed details from this story before. I've missed it while I've preached. Who welcomes him? Martha. Not Mary and Martha. Martha welcomes Jesus into whose home? Her home. I mean, the text does not insinuate that there's a man in the home that's the head of the home. He doesn't insinuate, like, all you really know about Mary and Martha is they have these two sisters and a younger brother. And so Luke is framing Martha as the head host of the home. And here she is. What is she? She begins by welcoming Jesus. And if you recall from our weeks previously in this study, there have been people who have opposed and turned Jesus away. And so welcoming this sign of hospitality was a very moral thing. It was a righteous thing. It was a beautiful thing. Like Martha starts off by doing something beautiful for Jesus. Let's not make Martha the villain, because the text isn't. The text is not making Martha a villain. She welcomes him. And so, again, this holy, beautiful hospitality was a way of making a stranger a friend. Prior to this, we don't know, and based on Luke's account, we don't know what level of relationship Jesus has with these sisters, if any. But they appear multiple times in the gospel accounts, and what we know is again, we don't know a lot about Jesus' social life, but what we do know is that he does have one, and these sisters are in it. These are friends of Jesus. And so if you're the person who organizes the meal, who makes the preparations, who makes the plan, who sets the party, who, stocks the pantry, who welcomes the guests, sincerely, congratulations. Like, you are Martha, and you're also not a villain. You're not the person that's doing the wrong thing. Another thing is Jesus, if you read this text carefully, Jesus never issues a harsh word towards Martha. He's never scolding her. He's never getting angry with her. In fact, it's the very opposite. Jesus actually shows a ton of tenderness towards this sister. And again, I think the problem is our allergy to correction. And we assume that correction is frustration and miss the tender invitation that Jesus offers in verse 41. Do you see that in verse 41? But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha." We'll get more into that later. Depending on your translation, it may say, "Martha, Martha." But that double naming is actually a tenderness. It's not, "Martha, Martha." It's, "My dear Martha, Martha, Martha." There's a compassionate tone that Jesus is extending to this sister. Now Mary, notice verse 39. Her sister, Mary, sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. She sits at the feet of Jesus. This was a place of a disciple, a learner. This was not a casual place for somebody to sit. In fact, where we actually see that word "sitting at the feet" again in the New Testament is when Luke is recording in Acts about how Paul says, when he's talking about being a Roman and being a Jew, he said, "I sat at the feet of Gamaliel." So it was a place of intense discipleship. And here, now you have this woman, Mary, and this is much more clear in the original language, but the text does not imply that she was loitering around and nobody wanted to sit there, so it was the open seat. No, it's actually a really intentional sitting like this was a choice. She sits at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus isn't like, "What are you doing here? Don't you know this is just for men?" He doesn't do that. Jesus does not rebuke her for sitting at his feet. He commends her for sitting at his feet. And in fact, this was a scandalous idea in the first century, and Jesus elevated the worth of women in that first century world today, and there has not been a movement that has elevated women more than the Jesus movement. If you don't believe me, there's a 24-hour audio book called Dominion that's literally all about how the Christian world, how the Christian message changed the world. And this was written by a sociologist who wasn't even a Christian. But he's just seeing how the Jesus movement sought the well-being of people in the margins. How it was the Christian group that cared for the sick. It was the Christian world that cared for the orphan. It was the Christian world that cared for the woman more than any other movement in history. And it's actually Luke that more than any other gospel writer is highlighting the value of women in Jesus' ministry. If you remember back in Luke chapter, was it 8? It was, who was it that was following and funding the ministry of Jesus? It was women. Profound details that you can easily graze over. But here, Mary sitting at the feet, this was a place of intentional discipleship. Jesus does not rebuke her for it. He commends her for it. And I was thinking about this week as we were, was prepping, and I was just thinking, what would this church, we have some great women here. We have awesome women here. But I was like literally praying for our women that you ladies would become theological monsters. Seriously. That you would be women who are women of the word, who know the word, who are strong in the word, and that you sit at the feet of Jesus. And you see Jesus discipling you in really profound ways. Women, do not be afraid to be strong in the word. Don't be afraid to be stronger in the word than your husband. And men, that's not a call for you to be passive and say, oh, it's okay. I'm literally just saying, women, you don't need to fear your maturity and your growth in the Lord because of maybe where your husband's at. Hopefully, 1 Peter 3, it would be by your conduct that you guide him into his role. Right? So don't shy away. This is an invitation for all of us to sit at the feet of Jesus. It's not gender specific. And so Mary is praised, but she's not praised for being passive to home duties. It's not like, Mary, awesome job not helping out with dinner. Hey, Mary, so glad you were able to take some time for some rest and get the load off of your feet. No. She is defended and admonished for her discipleship, and Jesus affirms her location as a student within his ministry world. There she was, learning at the feet of Jesus. And so right away, this is not Mary good, Martha bad. Right? What we've seen so far is Martha welcoming in, serving, Mary sitting at the... They're both doing good things. Like, you cannot honestly read this text and think one sister is bad and one sister is good. Because the text doesn't say it. The text doesn't go there. The text is pretty clear. They're both doing good things. The point of this text is that while they're both doing good things, only one of them is presently centered in on Jesus. But now, obviously, the thing that we really need to look at with me at verse 40. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. And so that word distracted, that word honestly means to be dragged into different directions. It's not the verb here is not saying that she had too much to do. The verb here is talking about this inward fragmentation. She while she wants to be with Jesus in this room, she also knows, I also have to do all these other things. And so the correction here is not that she has activity. It's that she has fragmentation. It's that she's got an inward dividedness. She has an inward war of loves and affections. Jesus is going to expose it. He's going to pull that out of her. But I think oftentimes we could hear that and think, oh, she's distracted. Okay, because she's busy. Busy bad. And it's like, no, distracted. She's pulled in too many directions, and there isn't enough focus on one. And so this is not about activity. She's trying to be governed by too many things. And Martha's problem is not that she's serving, but that in her service is now becoming void of hospitality. Like, she breaks the very laws and logic of hospitality. No, continue reading with me. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. What did she just do? Does somebody hospitable go up and embarrass their sister in front of a room? Doesn't sound like hospitality to me. And not only does she embarrass her sister in front of the room, but she's now using the guest to arbitrate the conflict, the familial conflict. Do you sense how awkward that is? I mean, imagine being Jesus. You're sitting there. There's clearly family conflict happening right in front of you. And now, as the guest, we don't know the depth of relationship yet. He is being asked to fix her. If your prayer life has a list of people that you're asking God to fix, I'm telling you, your prayer life's not in a good place. If it's a laundry list of people, there may be something we're avoiding about ourselves there. And here, she wants Jesus to correct Mary. And so she invites Jesus, and then she tries to leverage Jesus. All right, Jesus. She wants everyone in that room to know that she's right and Mary's wrong. And when we get to that place where we just need everyone there to know I'm right, we're coming then into a place of not hospitality, but we're coming into a place of prosecution and judgment. Because it's not just that I'm right. Because if you need to be the one that's right, well, then what else do you need? You need a bunch of other people to be wrong. And so then notice service is no longer giving, but it's prosecution and judgment. And she knows she's right. Look at the language in verse 40. You feel bad for Jesus. Because Martha was distracted about the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? How do you answer that question? No, Martha, it's okay that you do all the work and she sits here. Like, you frame the question in a way that Jesus loses no matter how he answers. It's, hey, feel bad for me because I'm right, she's wrong. Jesus, you fix this. Tell her to come help me. Fix my situation. And this is what anxiety does. It converts concern into control. I was reading an article in the APA this week that was all about general anxiety and how often what people that are some of the most anxious people you'll meet are some of the most controlling people you'll ever meet. Because anxiety, when not being treated well, not being treated in a healthy way, if we allow it to run wild, what it will do is it'll take the concerns that I have to the control that I now have to take, and I have to now control other people to soothe my anxiety. That's not me, that's scientific journal. So we're clear. But here, she is seeking to control her sister. She wants to control Jesus to control her sister. See that? You see how that anxiety moved to control? Jesus, go get her in line. I'm getting you in line to get her in line. It's a dangerous, dangerous place. And what anxiety will do, and it camouflages so well, but anxiety will turn your service into self-justification. It'll allow me to deal with, by me serving, by me taking control, I'm good, I'm right. In verse 41, this is the state of her soul. If Scott Engelman asked Martha, what is the state of your soul? This is the answer. But the Lord said to her, verse 41. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. Notice the two verbs that Jesus pairs together. She is worried and upset. She's not just anxious, she's agitated. She's allowed this fear to grow into anger, and it's bubbling over and pouring out on other people. And so she's now dealing with this anxiety, she's dealing with this agitation, and there's so much inward noise. And she doesn't have ability to hear what God might even be trying to speak to her in her frustration, in her fear, in her worry. There's so much perplexation in her, and it can make it impossible to hear Jesus. And I think for some of us, that may be where we're at. We have so many different feelings and emotions coming from all different places that it's hard to quiet ourselves and say, okay, Lord, what are you actually trying to say to me in this moment, in this season, in this hour? And Jesus, with nothing but tenderness and compassion still. I don't know about you, if you've ever been tried to be controlled. Usually, most of the time when somebody's trying to be controlled, that person then bucks up and says, you're going to control me, I'm going to control you. Jesus doesn't do that. My dear Martha, or Martha, Martha, He sees the ache of her soul. He sees the tragedy of her soul. He sees the inward perplexation. He sees the fragmentation. He sees the brokenness. And he wants, not that her service is bad, but he wants to free her service from the anxieties that are crippling her. And so, look at what he says in verse 42. This is a warm blanket to the soul. He says, there is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken from her. So, verse 42, depending on your translation, there's a textual variant, which means there's manuscripts that actually document it differently, and people that have interpreted and translated have had to do immense work with some of the most ancient manuscripts that we have. But some of the older manuscripts would use the language, there are few things worth being concerned about, indeed only one. Here the NLT translator says it's just the one. But if we think about there are few things, or indeed only one, then it's possible Jesus is doing two things. He may simply be saying to Martha, Martha, the meal does not need to be this elaborate. Like you're bringing out the china, you're bringing out the best things, you're dusting every nook and crevice of the house. You are making sure every detail is aligned correctly. You are making sure you're measuring the temperature of the meat. I'm telling you, I'll eat it medium rare or I'll eat it medium well. Don't do well done because that's terrible. If you eat your meat well done, I'm sorry, I'm praying for you today. But he's saying, you've concerned yourself with so many other things. I would have been good with soup. And for all you type A'ers out there, you can breathe a sigh of relief. It's okay if the charcuterie board ain't perfect. That's not the measure of your hospitality. The measure of your hospitality is your love and your care and the presence that you're able to have with your guest, not how perfect your meal looks. Breathe a sigh of relief. But additionally, and I think the more important thing that Jesus is getting at when he comes here to saying there's indeed only one, is you are trying to be controlled by too many things. But you only need one. There's only one center of your life. There's only one greatest affection. There's only one greatest love, and everything else will orbit out around that. But you try to do multiple things, you're going to find yourself twisted and tied and all sorts of fragmented. There's no way your life can operate well with a committee at the center. There indeed is only one. Jesus is calling for that highest allegiance of her life, and in having that highest allegiance to her life, she will experience freedom. But she's trying to be controlled by too many things. And then when you look at the final verse of our text, he says, and Mary has discovered the good portion. She has discovered the one thing, and it will not be taken away from her. This is an echoing of an old psalm, Psalm 27, a psalm of David, a man after God's heart, who says, the one thing that I would seek after is that I would dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, that I would gaze upon his beauty and inquire in his temple. David, the man after God's heart, the one thing that he sought was presence with God. The one thing that Mary has found herself doing is seeking the presence of God. And this actually only emerges 3 times or across the Gospels, this emerges 3 times where you find Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. In Luke chapter 10, she is learning at the feet of Jesus. In John chapter 11, she is weeping at the feet of Jesus. And in John chapter 12, she is anointing at the feet of Jesus. 3 separate occasions, Mary is finding herself at the feet of Jesus. And so essentially, she learns, she laments, and she loves at the feet of Jesus. Like the feet of Jesus have become the center formation center of her life. Like she is being discipled at the feet. What did we say earlier? At the feet of a rabbi was the place of a student. And not only is she being discipled there in her head, but she's getting discipled there in her heart, in her mind, in her soul. Like that's discipleship. But we have, the modern Western church has been influenced and impacted much by Western philosophy. And Western philosophy was influenced heavily by the age of the Enlightenment. And so we think very academically. We think discipleship is, I sit in a classroom, there's a teacher, I get some academics, I can go now answer questions on a test. And we think that's discipleship. That is a shallow view of discipleship. If you have a PhD in theology, but you don't know how to answer the questions about your heart, you have a shallow understanding of discipleship. Here, Mary shows us discipleship is mind, heart, and spirit, brought to the feet of Jesus and formed into his image. May we not think that it's all about head knowledge. It's a piece of it. She's learning there. I'm not discounting that. But there's many other areas of our formation into discipleship that we often miss. And in this text, it shows us that discipleship is far deeper and wider than what we've often thought in the modern Western church. And so here, Mary focused on Jesus, and she's commended for it. It's the one thing that Martha needs to get right. But notice, to me, this is the coolest tidbit that I can give you today from the stories of Mary and Martha. That if you leave with everything else, don't miss this. So, remember, Martha is serving. She's serving from the wrong place. But notice this in John chapter 12, verse 2. In John chapter 12, verse 2, what you see is, sorry, one second. The time is coming when everything that is covered up will be revealed, and all that is, John 12. I'm in Luke. That's why. John 12:2, there's a meal that's being done in the honor of Jesus, and Martha served. This is after Jesus brought correction to her service. And so what we can logically conclude then from the text is that Jesus wasn't rebuking service. He wasn't taking away her calling in life to be a server. I mean, that when it's talking about her service, the language that's kind of used there in Luke, in our text in Luke 10, is the word that you'll eventually get for deacon, diakonia, right? It's this Greek word that's all about good, right service. So he's not freeing her from service. He's freeing her service from anxiety, from making it about her identity, and inviting her into a love relationship where her service now is a flow from, not a flowing for. And what a beautiful, beautiful invitation we get from watching this story play out. He does not take away her gifts, but he positions them to be done in the right, healthy way. It's funny because you think about how this story parallels to what we studied last week, the Good Samaritan, love of neighbor. But if we do love of neighbor without love for God, I'm telling you, you will deform your soul. It's not one or the other. Jesus isn't saying, he isn't forgetting about the serving of the Samaritan. But if you're serving the Samaritan void of love for Jesus, you're doing the wrong thing. In the modern church, kind of evangelical church, there's kind of a couple of styles of churches that you can experience, and they're often pitted against each other. There's kind of the devotion group, like, hey, we're devoted, we're deep, we go through deep scripture and deep theology, and and we're the ones that are right. And then you have the service kind of church that's out in the community, being the hands and feet of Jesus. And, we're evangelizing, we're serving, but, we're outside the four walls, and we're the church, and we're the ones that are doing it right. And somewhere along the lines, these two groups started competing with each other. But when I look at this text, I don't see competition. I see the invitation for both. That we would not be a church that is just glued into these four walls. We need to come in here. We need to have our eyes, hearts, minds, souls fixed on Jesus. Looking to him, Lord, grow me deeper. I want to know more of your love. I want to know more of your truth because your truth leads me to life. And so if there's more that I don't know, if there's greater truth that I haven't experienced, God, teach me because you're beautiful and you're worthy and I want all of you. That part is necessary. But if we miss the fact that there's Samaritans out there that need our love, that need Jesus, we need to go there too. There was a pastor down in Dallas that I remember watching one time, and he was talking about, we often get asked, hey, are you a discipleship church or are you a seeker church? And he said, the only way I know how to frame that question and how to answer it is to ask the same person, which wing on the plane matters more? Right? We are incomplete if we are just in here. We are incomplete if we're just out there. May this passage shape, this is not, again, I said this from the beginning, this text is not about which sister's right. They're both doing good things. One of them is not the villain to be discarded. It's an invitation to come from the right place, but not to be discarded. And so would our love and our service flow from our presence with Jesus? This text is about apprenticeship to Jesus, that as we sit at the feet of Jesus, that it would lead us to doing our calling, using our gifts, and serving and loving our neighbor. Let me pray for us.